Hello and welcome. My guest today is Andrij Dobriansky, Director of Communication at the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. Andrij, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mr. Witkoff mentioned the idea of a peace deal that could involve Ukraine's territories, but today President Zelenskyy made it very clear. These are red lines and only Ukrainians can decide on their land. Why do you think Mr. Witkoff is talking so openly about this? Isn't it a bit over the line?
Much like his over-the-line descriptions of his conversations with Hamas for the Middle East ceasefire, as well as what he plans to do with Iran, a lot of these proposals coming out of SteveWitkoff are over the line. For the conversations with Russia, the problem is here that he is meeting with somebody who is clearly manipulating him. We know that that is the number one thing that Mr. Putin and his team is prone to do. Constantly manipulating their Western visitors. This is not a person, SteveWitkoff, who has done international negotiations for diplomacy. He has no knowledge of the area, does not speak the language, clearly sitting across from people who have studied him, his entire career, Mr. Trump, and the best ways to manipulate Mr. Trump as well. And when we heard in the United States, it was last night, that he had an interview where he explained that he had come to some kind of realization of what Russia was seeking. This is simply yet another instance that he was very much easily manipulated by his counterpart, which we already saw during the Middle East ceasefire, which only took about a week or two for him to declare that he was surprised that Hamas had lied to him. We know that Russia is lying to him as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Witkoff is trying to watch how Ukrainians react to the idea of giving up land to Russia? And why do you think he's doing this in public?
It's very clear that he does not care about the position of Ukraine. He left that to another set of negotiators. He has yet to actually spend time at the front line. This is something that Ukraine has made very clear to anybody in the United States government. They should come and visit and see exactly what we're talking about, and not just simply regurgitate, repeat everything that the Russian side is telling them, including a false history about what these territories are, including a false history about what the people in those territories want. This is something that he can go visit the free areas of Kherson and Zaporizhia and understand exactly what the proposals from the Russians, what that would mean for those people.
Mm-hmm. So you really think the administration, Trump administration, really want to use a question about territory of Ukraine with Russians?
Right now, we have no idea what they're talking about. What they were talking about originally is a 30-day ceasefire. If Putin had agreed to that ceasefire, we would already have been past the 30 days. This is how long Russia has refused to work with the United States, how long Russia has embarrassed the president of the United States by not only refusing to work with him, but also putting out statements that are in contrast to the White House statements about what they discussed. So whatever is proposed here is simply going to be the opening talking point between Russia and President Trump. And unfortunately for President Trump, Russia doesn't seem to be doing anything to demonstrate that it wants to come to an end of this war.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the US didn't support a G7 statement about the Russian attack on Sumy. Bloomberg says it's because they want to keep talking to Moscow, maybe because Trump is afraid to lose a peace deal. Do you think he's showing too much fear, and could Russia use that against him?
Very much showing fear. He has not shown anything in terms of being strong with Russia. Since the beginning of this conversation, when Trump proposed a meeting with Ukrainian representatives, a meeting with Russian representatives, we have had the analogy of using a carrot and sticks to move a stubborn mule. From Ukraine's side, we have only experienced the stick from the United States. We have experienced the suspension of aid, the suspension of intelligence sharing, harsh words of rhetoric from the president and his advisors and the cabinet of ministers throughout this entire process, only against Ukraine. It seems that Russia is getting all the carrots. Russia gets all the praise, even in the tweet that went out just a few hours ago, complaining about President Zelenskyy from President Trump. He was complaining that President Zelenskyy and Mr. Biden started this war, and he praised President Putin for respecting him. So it seems that the only praise goes to Russia, which is the enemy, which is the war criminal, which is the side making genocide. And unfortunately for Ukraine right now, we have only experienced pressure from the United States.
I have one more question. Trump refused to condemn Russia after the missile strike on Sumy. Do you think this is kind of position damages democracy? How democracy really feel?
Well, right now he's damaging his alliances around the world, especially with the democratic world, especially with the Western Atlantic Alliance, putting tariffs on all of his allied nations, making their economies suffer, and not being very clear about how to get our way out of this. This was, frankly, a declaration of war against our allies, an economic war. It's not even clear if this is allowed in the various free trade as well as NATO agreements we have with these countries. So from one side, he's attacking our allies, including his closest allies, which are Mexico and Canada. At the same time, he is elevating autocracies and dictatorships like Russia, like Iran, and even working with an autocrat like the president of El Salvador.
The dollar just dropped to a 6-month low because of Trump's new tariff policy. What are people in the US saying about it? How do they feel? Do they understand what Trump is doing? Because polls show mixed results, especially now with protests and a small economic crisis going on.
Right. The valuation that has plagued the dollar, that has plagued the treasury bond. There are many issues economically, but first and foremost, Trump's actions wiped out over $10 trillion of investments in the stock market, in long-term investments, in people's retirement savings. This won't be felt right away. It'll be felt right away for some people who may have planned to retire this year and just simply live on their pensions. But other than that, the price increases that we're all expecting, it's a little confusing because technically the president doesn't have the constitutional power to implement these tariffs. He is announcing them, but it's on Congress to implement tariffs. So we're not quite sure if any of these have been paid by the importers. This is who pays the tariffs. It's the importing companies, and then they pass along that to their customers. Some prices have gone up marginally, but this is in advance of being charged those tariffs, which again, we have no evidence that any tariffs have actually been charged to any goods that have come from overseas. We will first and foremost be experiencing that as a country in as far as food products. We have daily food shipments from South America, from warmer climates. These include fruits and vegetables, as well as coffee beans, which, as anybody who knows an American knows, Americans can't live without their coffee, which comes in daily on barges from across the world. So once regular Americans start feeling that on a regular basis at the store, we might get a bigger, louder reaction. But as of this point, many Americans, unless they have savings for retirement, they haven't felt a loss of dollar value as of yet.
Okay, let's explore that idea a bit more. China is now trying to unite Europe, Japan, and South Korea to push back against Trump and his tariffs. That's what Reuters says. Can we say that Trump's actions are turning against him? Because now China wants to build new economic alliances with countries that are also hurt by these tariffs.
Right. This has been what Trump has done for both of his administrations. In his first administration, he canceled or walked America out of a Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would have allied all countries around the Pacific Rim against China, so they could utilize their buying power together, as opposed to a country as powerful as China. Once again, now he is starting an economic war with all of the United States allies at the same time that he wants to do an economic trade war with China. China, as we know, is fully prepared to have their own population suffer, not so much the United States. There are various factors involved here, including the amounts of United States Treasury bonds that China and its satellite countries have purchased in order to control the bond market. We just saw this in the last week. This is what scared President Trump into stopping the European tariffs or pausing them for 90 days, which was the sudden sell-off of Treasury bonds, Treasury notes by China, Japan, and other countries. So there's a lot of means of manipulation. We also know that even though China is only responsible for about 10% of pharmaceuticals, drug supplies in the United States, the kind of drugs that they produce are at the very low end. And so the elimination of them from the American drug market, which is the next step of President Trump's tariffs, this would cause an absolute cratering, loss of basic antibiotic drugs that come from China. And the higher end drugs are still manufactured mostly in the United States as well as Europe. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of complicated ways that China could, imposing tariffs on China could affect us. We are just seeing the beginning of the retaliation by China.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the situation between the US and China will calm down anytime soon? What are people in the US saying about it?
Well, mostly it's worried about any pricing. We know that the proposed tariffs of 145% from the American side, and on the other side, China has proposed nearly 100% tariffs on many goods, and we know that America's farmers will be the first ones hit with this. Many soybeans, many agricultural products are sold from America's farmers to China, and this is what was affected during President Trump's first term when he started a trade war with China back then. And there really was no solution for it. They came down at a table and got to a negotiation over a year later. But in the intervening time, America's farms had to be subsidized by the federal government to the tune of several $billion. This was not a cheap trade war. If the federal government hadn't bailed out the large farming corporations in the Midwest, we would see a complete dissolvement, collapse of America's agricultural industry. It's possible that might happen again unless there's funding to supply money to those farms in the interim for the time being.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and one more interesting news story. Trump's spiritual advisor, Mark Burns, said after his visit to Ukraine that he was wrong to support stopping military aid to the Ukrainian army. But here in Ukraine, we don't really know much about this guy. How close is he to Trump and how much influence does he actually have? Could this mean what people close to Trump are finally seeing what's really happening, especially after Russia's attacks on children?
I think this just underscores what Ukraine's strategy has been for advocacy, which is simply invite people to see with their own eyes what is happening in Ukraine. Pastor Burns has been involved with President Trump since his first presidential campaign before the election in 2016. He often appeared on television showing support as a person of color who supports President Trump. When President Trump got in trouble for several racist statements, Pastor Burns would come out and explain why President Trump wasn't really a racist. Then Pastor Burns changed or used the elevation after the election of President Trump and his closeness with him to run for Congress several times unsuccessfully. So he did that in 2018. He did that in 2020. He did that again in 2022 and 2024. every time losing, but seeking some kind of elected office. We see, so he does have a closeness as far as a political ally with President Trump. We also know that President Trump isn't that really a religious person. At the beginning of his administration, he visited a church in Washington where the bishop reminded the people attending church to have mercy on the weak and the poor, as Jesus commanded us. And President Trump put out a statement against this, and Pastor Burns defended him publicly. So this is the kind of person Pastor Burns is, somebody who will defend President Trump publicly. This is why President Trump likes him. I don't know if he's able to convince him on the factor of Ukraine, but we do know that Pastor Burns also has access to the halls of Congress, and hopefully he can convince members of Congress, even if he can't convince President Trump, to make sure that Congress keeps funding Ukraine in the next congressional budget.
By the way, yesterday Trump blamed Putin, Biden and Zelenskyy for the war. I think this is the first time he's even said Putin is guilty, even a little. Why do you think he did that?
Well, President Trump did not react well to the terror attack on Sumy. He made up a story about it being an accident. We all know it's not an accident with ballistic missiles. These are programmed coordinates that need to be put into the computer, as well as a double tap attack. So it was programmed twice, once for the first missile, once for the second missile to hit in the same location. So this was not a mistake, as he tried to convince members of the press that it was a mistake. And then he was made upset by all the reporters asking him, "Why did you say it was a mistake? It was clearly not a mistake. Why are you not condemning this terror attack? We know that other nations, Emmanuel Macron, governments around the world, Canada, Germany, condemned the terror attack on Sumy." And this made President Trump angry. He wanted to talk about the things he wants to talk about, not how he was wrong about Ukraine. And so he did the same thing he did when President Zelenskyy visited him in the White House. He did the same thing when he was asked about Ukraine at presidential debates. He blamed Ukraine because that's the only thing he can do with a politician who worked with President Biden. He's very much against anybody who would work with President Biden, and so he sees Ukraine, even though Ukraine wasn't working with President Biden, they were working with the United States, and the entire United States Congress supported working with Ukraine. Unfortunately, President Trump doesn't see it that way, and when he is upset, he automatically goes back to not being a president, but being a presidential candidate and using a lot of rhetoric that's upsetting to people.
Are there anything that the relationship between Trump and Putin is getting worse?
Yes, other than SteveWitkoff talking yesterday about his conversation and how he has discovered the final part of the peace deal. He wouldn't disclose what that is, but that was really the only positive news towards Russia that we had heard from the White House since the beginning of this quote-unquote peace process. The peace process from the Russian side began with President Trump talking to President Putin. President Trump had planned to have a press conference announcing to the world that he spoke with President Putin. President Putin was ready to do a ceasefire. That never happened. In addition to that, President Putin put out a separate statement, including things like a hockey tournament in the United States or other fantastical ideas that President Trump did not agree to. That upset President Trump even more. The White House has been upset at the Russian side for not coming to the table even a little bit as close as Ukraine has come. Ukraine obviously proposed a ceasefire. President Trump asked for a total ceasefire of 30 days, and Ukraine agreed to this. This is not what Russia has done. And now we are approaching April 20th, which was the proposed date for a beginning of a ceasefire without any ceasefire on the table. And we know that President Trump has told his own staff, understanding that the Senate and the House of Representatives are preparing a bill to increase sanctions and tariffs against Russia, that Russia has until the end of April to come to the table with a peace proposal that can be the beginning of something. But right now, with the attacks on Sumy, with the attacks every day across Ukraine, this is something that keeps making President Trump angry.
So would you call this this a serious shift in their relationship?
I don't think President Trump takes this personally with President Putin. He seems to take it personally with President Zelenskyy. I think he wants to have an ongoing relationship with President Putin and Russia for some reason. We don't know why. But I don't think that this misunderstanding between the two sides, the misunderstanding being Trump believes he can convince Putin and Putin is not being convinced. So I think in his heart, I believe President Trump still believes he can convince President Putin to come to some sort of agreement. I don't believe this agreement will be in the best interest of Ukraine, but we have yet to see a solid proposal for all the countries to start debating publicly.
Okay. And you know, Ukrainian is still asking how can we defend ourselves? President Zelenskyy said Ukraine is ready to buy 10 Patriot systems from the US for $15 billion, but many people here in Ukraine don't understand why we have to pay for this. The US once gave security guarantees to Ukraine, but now it feels like those guarantees never really exist. How do Americans see this?
Well, in public polling, there's still an enormous support for sending aid to Ukraine, supporting Ukraine in this war. So we see in the public opinion polls that Americans still support this. And we also see this from local politicians, governors, mayors, state assemblies across the country, all voice their support for Ukraine. What we're not seeing is from the very top of the government, and that starts with President Trump and his intention to, as he has put it numerous times, have Ukraine pay back the United States for help. Even though the United States was not sending vast sums of money, they were sending expired munitions, things that the United States would have had to explode by itself. They were paying American workers to make bombs and munitions for Ukraine. So many of the things that President Trump is speaking about publicly don't really make any sense. And so that has to do with a fundamental misunderstanding. President Trump should do what President Zelenskyy did, which is visit the munitions plant where Americans are making bombs for Ukraine. President Trump should also visit Ukraine, as President Zelenskyy has repeatedly asked him to, including in his first administration. President Zelenskyy has been asking President Trump since 2019 to visit Ukraine. So we hope to see some kind of cooperation going forward. But at this point, it seems that the president and the vice president and his staff are convinced that they can get some money out of Ukraine, which is, as we all know, defending democracy and defending Europe.
Okay, thank you, Andrij. This is a really great conversation. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Andrij Dobriansky, Director of Communication at the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. Thank you, Andrij.